All right, there we go. All right, guys, welcome. So this is a multimedia presentation. So there's going to be videos, pictures, documents, and audio. So make sure your audio's up and be a little patient because the videos take a couple of seconds to queue up. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And this is us here at the Herbert Hoover Presidential Library Museum. I'm actually out in Iowa. We're part of the National Archives and Records Administration and the Presidential Library System. So first, let's talk about World War I. It ravaged Europe from July 28, 1914 until November 11th, 1918. The US did not enter the war until 1917. But why?
So America watches World War I from 1914 to April of 1917. And people ask why. Why doesn't America get involved immediately? And American politicians are petrified of being drawn into a foreign war and fighting for foreign ends.
Remember, the United States is a nation of immigrants. People came here to avoid war in Europe.
The Americans had, from the very beginning, an official policy of neutrality. But neutrality never meant indifference or apathy.
Even though we're saying we don't want to involve ourselves, we certainly were sympathetic in trying to help and aid that cause in ways that the Germans saw as being destructive to their war aims. So in all those ways, the Wilson administration is walking a tightrope.
Woodrow Wilson, after all, runs for re-election in 1916 on the slogan, "He kept us out of war." And yet within a year after winning that election, that very same president is declaring war on the Germans.
Ultimately, the triggering event that brings us into the war is Germany's decision to revive unrestricted submarine warfare.
Added to that, the Germans had managed in a particularly ham-fisted way to try and recruit the Mexicans to come in on their side if America entered the war. And they had offered to return to the Mexicans all the lands they had lost in the 19th century to the US, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona. The Germans sent this offer to the Mexicans by telegram, Western Union, of all things. Only what they didn't realize was the Western Union office was in London. And so the British captured the telegram and promptly sent it to the US and released it in public. And that angered the American people so much that, combined with unrestricted submarine warfare, Wilson felt that he had to take the US into the war against Germany and Austro-Hungary.
So war is declared here, and the United States enters and they leave. And once the soldiers get home, the United States starts putting out posters like this one. They're encouraging soldiers to practice good behavior, and they want them to get back to work. But what did the troops really look like when they got home? So we're going to take a look at this video of what shell-shocked looked like. Because many of our 1920s, shell-shock was a mixture of neurological disorders On May 1922, a Hearst newspaper truck from New York City delivered a petition to the US Capitol that had more than 1 million signatures in support of a bonus for World War I veterans. The document said, We respectfully petition Congress to pass the Soldiers' Bonus Act without further delay, and also to levy a sales tax to obtain the money to pay the bonus. So let's take a look at these pictures here. So this is the Hearst newspaper truck pulling up to Congress with this petition that had 1 million signatures. And then we can see the uniformed veterans carrying this petition up the steps of Congress. And these petitions are huge, right? Take a look at those. So let me ask you guys a question for the chat box. Do American citizens have the right to petition the government, yes or no? Do you have the right? People are saying yes, yes, all right. And where can that right be found? See the First Amendment. All right, so let's take a look at the First Amendment. This is the bill from the Bill of Rights. It says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or of the right of the people to peaceably assemble and petition the government for redress of grievances. So 2 parts of the First Amendment are really important to this story we're going to learn today, this part of history. Number 1 being that you have the right to petition the government, because that's where this starts for us. And number 2, the right to peaceably assemble, because this is going to come up over and over again in this session. So Congress actually passed a bonus in 1922, but Warren Harding vetoed it. And this is the cover of one of the newspapers from that time. So then again in 1924, Congress passed another bonus bill. And on May 15th, 1924, President Calvin Coolidge vetoed the bill and said, patriotism bought and paid for is not patriotism. So let's unpack some of this for a second. Calvin Coolidge is the president before Herbert Hoover, first of all, so that's really important to know for our timeline. Secondly, what does it mean to be a patriot? That means you love your country, you want to serve your country, right? So Calvin Coolidge says patriotism bought and paid for is not patriotism. So he's telling these veterans that they are not patriots for wanting their bonus to be paid or to get a bonus, which is really insulting. But I want to show you guys this website. It's a really interesting website. It's from the US Capitol Visitor Center. And this is that 1924 bill, the Soldier Bonus Act. And this is what the inside of a bill looks like. This is the outside. It's folded up into 3 sections like a trifold. And our bills still look like this today. I encourage all of you after the session to visit this site. It has really great letters from soldiers who needed money, some signed petitions, just some really interesting things. So let's go back here. So 1924, Coolidge vetoes the bill, like we said. So how many votes are needed to override a presidential veto? How many votes are needed? It's a great question for the chat box. Who knows how many votes are needed to override a presidential veto? Seeing some answers come in, saying 2/3. So the answer is 2/3. I just want to give you guys a fun fact. Presidents have vetoed 1,484 bills, and Congress has overridden only 106 of them. And that's today. That's not as of 1924. That's today, all right? So Congress override his veto a few days later, and the bonus was passed as the Adjusted Compensation Act, or HR Bill 7959. The payment provided veterans $1.25 per day for service overseas and $1 per day for domestic service. The bonus would not pay out until the veteran's birthday in 1945, or it would pay out his estate, that means like his family, if he died before then. Bonuses totaling $50 or less were paid in cash, but bonuses over $50 were awarded as certificates with a combined face value of $3.64 billion. That would be equivalent to $54 billion now. And they limited this so that it would control government spending. Congress established a trust fund to receive 20 annual payments of $112 million that, with interest, would finance the 1945 disbursement of the $3.638 billion for the veterans. So this slide shows you what a certificate looked like and the corresponding letter that each veteran received. So I want to take a look at this here. So this comes from the Veterans Bureau, and it says that you're getting your adjusted service certificate. It's issued because of the Adjusted Compensation Act, and the amount this veteran got was $1,499, which was about the average amount that veterans would get. And then this is what that certificate looked like that these veterans would receive. This man was from Tampa, Florida. And then at the bottom here, it shows you the loan values of the certificate. So at any given time, how much the certificate is actually worth. On October 29th, 1929, the stock market crashed on what would become to be known as Black Tuesday. This is often recognized as the start of the Great Depression. And I think it's really important for everybody to remember that it's not the cause of the Great Depression. In economics, we actually say that the stock market is a lagging indicator of what's going on in the economy, because the stock market reacts to what's going on. So there's other things that are happening that are making the economy come kind of unraveled, and then the stock market crashes in response to that. The economy continued to slide for many years following the Great Depression. In March of 1930, President Hoover said the worst was over and the economy would start to improve. He was wrong, of course. By 1931, there was food riots, the banks were failing, and unemployment was at about 15.83%. That means more than 8 million people were out of work. And the population at this time was much smaller than it is now. In 1929, unemployment was at 3.14%, so you can understand this full impact. And you can see these unemployment statistics right here. By 1932, unemployment was at 25.53%. More than 12 million did not have jobs at the time. So I think these photographs are really interesting for us to look at. If you were a person who was traveling around different cities looking for work, you might be greeted by a sign like this that says, "Jobless men keep going. We can't take care of our own." And it's a really good time to let you guys know that at this time of the Great Depression, there's no unemployment insurance if you lost your job. There's no food stamps. There's no Medicaid or Medicare. There's no welfare, and there's no Social Security for retired or disabled people. So if people lost their jobs and did not have money, they were at the mercy of generosity of people who lived in their town. If you guys have ever played Monopoly, you see in the middle, there's the community chest. The community chest was a real thing. That's where people would pool resources and you could pull out of it if you needed help. So these start popping up all over the country, and they're called bread lines or soup lines, and they were for unemployed people, and it was a place for them to get food and then go out and look for work. And it's really interesting, if you look at this photograph, you can see the different styles of hats, and that was a good way to tell if the person was wealthy or if they were average. But then at the end of the day, this was a huge equalizer. All of these people were out of work and standing in a soup line, right? So this picture is actually from one of the bonus march camps that we'll look at later. But I think it's really important because of the signs. It says Hoover's Poor Farm. Hard times are still hoovering over us. Do any of you know what they called shanties that people built when they were homeless during the Great Depression, or what people called newspapers that they would use as blankets? You can type it in the chat box. What did they call those shacks they were building? Hoovervilles, right? So those were Hoovervilles. There was Hoover hotels. Yeah, if you were using a newspaper, it was a Hoover blanket. People were eating armadillos and roadkill, and they would call them Hoover hogs. So Hoover was like, they were putting his name on everything. They were blaming him for all parts of the Great Depression because, of course, he's the president at this time, right? So let's take a look what's going on with veterans right now at this time. At this point, veterans could borrow up to 22.5% of the face value of their certificate. And we saw those certificates that told you how much it was worth at each time, right? In 1931, Congress upped that amount to 50%. Some members of Congress supported 100% payout of the veterans bonus. But who is gonna pay for it? Hoover wanted to find out. So let's take a look at some of the steps that Hoover took to try to find out who is going to pay for this. So first of all, Hoover requests information from the Veterans Bureau, and you can see here in this first paragraph, you see the conflicts and policies and the injustices that exist in our different forms of services to veterans. So first things first, he wants to know how veterans are being treated in the United States. Second, Hoover requests information from the Department of the Treasury to gauge the financial impact of paying out the bonus early. And you can see where these arrows are. The Treasury states it will cost $112 million, with the cost rising to $235 million annually. So further on in the letter, and I've got some arrows here for you guys to look at too, it is determined that individual taxes would need to be raised to cover the expense when the Treasury believes that the tax rate should be lowered to help relieve the economy. So let's reflect on this for a minute. And I've got a question here I want you guys to think about and put in the chat box for me. Do you think it is fair to raise taxes on Americans during the Great Depression to pay the World War I bonus that wasn't even promised until 1945? So I see some yeses and some nos, because this is really the issue that the president is dealing with at this time, right? Hoover and the Republican congressmen opposed an immediate payout of the bonus because the increase in taxes would hinder economic recovery from the Depression. So this next set of documents comes from the Veterans Administration. And it evaluates how many veterans are receiving relief through organized charities, such as the Red Cross. You can see the documents list the city, the total population, the estimated military population, and the number of veterans who are receiving relief. And so you see in the first column, city, total population, estimated military population, and then the number of veterans who are receiving relief. And look, New York has 20,000. If we look at the next group, Chicago has 10,900 veterans who are receiving relief. And then our next biggest ones are Minneapolis with 6,000 and Los Angeles with 4,000. And this is giving us an idea of how many veterans are depending on generosity to get by. So I want us to take a quick pause here for a second, because things are going to start happening really fast in our timeline. The time we've spent up until now was building context. And context tells us what's going on leading up to the event, so then we can evaluate the historic impact or how things changed after this event took place. So I want you guys in your minds right now to think about two types of context. I like to talk about big C and little c. And big C tells us the big picture, what's going on in the country, what's going on in the world. And then little c focuses on groups or an individual. So in the chat box, I want you guys to take a minute and think about these things. What is going on in the big C context? And you can think about what's going on in the United States right now. Secondly, what is going on in the little c context for World War I veterans? What is their world like? And third, What is going on in little c context for President Herbert Hoover? Think about the letters that he's written. Think about him getting elected and coming into office and all the events that have gone on that we've talked about, and the Veterans Bill. So I'll give you guys like a minute to type something in the chat box here. So we're getting some answers like credit and speculation leave folks with bills they can't cover. Yes. Of course, we're seeing Hoover bills popping up. If we think about World War I veterans, what are some things that they're facing? Think back to that video we kind of saw towards the beginning of shell shock and the pressure from the government and society to get back to work and to behave themselves and to snap in line, right? Again, there's handicaps with no VA. We're talking about people are desperate, feel responsible for their flight. There's plights and there's different generations. So let's talk about Herbert Hoover. So we know that Calvin Coolidge vetoed this bonus bill, right? And so Hoover comes in and now this bill is passed and he has to figure out how they're going to pay for it. But now also the Great Depression has started to set in, the stock market has crashed, and now there's this call to pay out these bills, these bonus bills, and Hoover's really concerned about balancing the budget and cutting taxes for all Americans instead of raising them. So this is kind of where we are right now. In May of 1932, Walter Waters, an Army veteran, proposed that every veteran head to Washington, D.C. to demand their bonus. The movement picked up steam and spread across the country and declared the opening day of Congress, December 5th, 1932, the day they would arrive in Washington, D.C. Men, women, and children crossed the country by trains and buses with help from a variety of people to eventually land in Washington, D.C. Along the way, the bonus army picked up recruits and arrived in Washington, numbering between 8,000 and 25,000 men. The number of participants varied, but since many men were accompanied by their wives and children, the bonus army may have numbered as many as 60,000 people. So just so you guys know, the group was called the Bonus Expeditionary Forces, or the BEF, by themselves. And then the press and historians and people now, they're called them Bonus March or Bonus Marchers or the Bonus Army. So I want to look at some of these pictures. This is one of the advertisements that went out across the country. And it's really important for a few things. There is, it's telling us the date that they're going to arrive. But up in the corner, it tells us that they're inviting both races, right? And think about, at this time, our country is largely segregated by Jim Crow laws. And so this event was billed as something that would not have segregation enforced. So everybody was welcome to join the bonus army. This is some men that are on the way, Washington or bust, bonus we trust, World War I veterans, so they were letting people know who they were. Veterans Bonus March on to Washington, and so these are some of the men. They're standing on railroad tracks, as you guys can see here. And then we can see this one. This one's fun. It's in front of the White House. We want our bonus on the way to Washington, D.C. And these guys were from Chattanooga, Tennessee. So these pictures start showing up all over the country, and everybody's on the way to Washington, D.C. So upon arrival, some of the bonus marchers constructed campsites on Anacostia Flats. Others occupied abandoned buildings in the city. In addition to the camps in Anacostia, there's 26 smaller camps that sprung up in DC, but they were mostly all on the northeast side of the city. Some observers believed that a portion of the marchers were not veterans, but communists and criminals bent on causing confrontation, though estimates of the number of criminals varied considerably. Many of Mr. Hoover's advisors and members of Congress suggested that Hoover order the army to disperse the marchers, as President Cleveland had done in a similar situation just 38 years earlier. But Hoover believed that most of the marchers were honest veterans and should be allowed to assemble because it was their constitutional right, so long as they did so peacefully. So let's take a look at this map. You can see in the red text here that this is where the main camp was. Anacostia Flats is a stop on the DC Metro. You can get off and walk around where this camp actually was. And there's some really interesting interpretive panels out there. But you can see how close this army, bonus army was to the White House and the US Capitol. They're just across the river. If you've ever been to DC, you can walk this little stretch really easily. So let's take a look at some of these camps so you can get an idea of how close they really were. This one's a really interesting one. You guys can see here, here's the Capitol on the back horizon here. So they are literally living in the shadow of Congress right now. And you can see them setting a bunch of different stuff up here. And that says BEF, the Bonus Expeditionary Forces, of course. And let's see this from another angle. There's a ton of people here, right? But I want you guys to take a look because they started calling these Hoovervilles too. Look what's on top of these tents. Looks like doors and mats and some like scrap wood, and there's different stuff all over here. Some of these tents were also issued to the men by the United States Army. There was a lot of sympathy for the veterans, so they delivered supplies to them to make sure that they were well taken care of while they were assembling. So most bonus marchers stayed in Washington, D.C. from December of 1932 until June 14th, 1932. A long time to live in a tent in Anacostia Flats, right? Several months there. And June 14th, 1932 is when the Senate voted on the bonus bill. And after that, a lot of them left. But the veterans published newspapers and they lobbied for their bonus. So you can see here, the cover of this particular issue addressed the unfounded claim that communists had infiltrated the bonus army and were agitators. The marchers made very clear that communism was not compatible with their goals. And I want to take a look at this picture with you guys because this is really important. You can see here, BEF, we want our bonus. This group was from Charleston. But there's women and children that are also living in this shanty town in Anacostia Flats in DC and the other various camps that were around. So it wasn't just the veterans that were out living in these conditions. So on June 15th, the House of Representatives passed the bonus bill by a vote of 211 to 176. The Hoover Republicans opposed the bill because they wanted a balanced budget. Hoover threatened to veto the bill. The Senate voted on June 17th. More than 8,000 veterans gathered in front of the Capitol to wait for the vote. Police raised the Anacostia drawbridge to keep back more than 10,000 veterans. Around 9:30 p.m., Senate aides called for Waters, the guy who told everyone to come to DC, and he was the leader of the bonus march, to tell them that the bill had been defeated. And so let's take a look at these pictures. This is the crowd that was able to assemble on the steps of Congress. And you can see they have their signs saying where they came from and what issues were represented. And so this is Waters. He's down here with everybody else, and they're showing off their signs, talking about how they want a bonus, we'll decide when we go, some different things, messages that they had for Congress that they wanted them to see. So after the bill's defeated, many of the protesters went home. Hoover offered interest-free loans charged against their bonus certificates to pay for train fares. So a lot of them took advantage of that. A few thousand remained behind, though again, the reported numbers vary. It was widely reported that most of the honest veterans had gone home and that those who remained were communists, criminals, or other agitators who had never even served in the military. So now what we're going to do is we're going to look at some of the documents to find out what happens. Most of everybody has gone home. There's only a few people left, and there's this public perception that they're mostly not veterans, they're communists, they're agitators, they're looking to cause trouble, right? So let's look at some of these documents here. On the morning of July 28th, the Treasury Department officials attempted to evacuate about 40 of the protesters who had been occupying a building in downtown Washington, D.C. that was scheduled for demolition. When the protesters refused to leave, the police were called in. The bonus army began to gather in force, and they soon outnumbered the police. Some of the policemen panicked and opened fire. 2 of the marchers were killed and a riot broke out. The District of Columbia Board of Commissioners quickly concluded that the police were overwhelmed, and they asked President Hoover to send troops to restore order. Let me zoom in here so we can see this a little bit better. There we go. Hoover ordered the Secretary of War, Patrick Hurley, to cooperate with the police. Hurley ordered Douglas MacArthur, and the name should sound familiar to you because he became a general later, Army Chief of Staff, to cooperate fully with the District of Columbia Police Force, which is now in charge. Surround the affected area and clear it without delay. Turn over all prisoners to the civil authorities. In your orders, insist that any women and children who may be in the affected area be accorded every consideration and kindness. Use all humanity consistent with the due execution of this order. So Herbert Hoover was very concerned with making sure that people were treated well, especially women and children. So let's pull up this next letter here. This one's from the White House. So fed up with the lawlessness and the DC commissioners' ability to restore order, Herbert Hoover wrote, "There is no group, no matter what its origins, that can be allowed either to violate the laws or the city or to intimidate the government." And you can see that down here where this arrow is pointing. So they're getting ready to ramp up how they're going to deal with these bonus marchers that are left. MacArthur thought the riot might be the beginning of a communist revolution, and he may have immediately made plans not only to quell the riot, but also to force the evacuation of the campsites on Anacostia Flats and expel the bonus army from the district. He later claimed that the police superintendent had verbally requested such an action. MacArthur assembled a battalion of infantry, a squadron of cavalry, and a platoon of tanks to deploy against the rioters. At 4:30 p.m., MacArthur's forces began to advance slowly, ordering groups of rioters to disperse as they encountered them. Tear gas was used when groups refused to cooperate. The soldiers arrived at Anacostia Flats a little after 9 p.m. Most of the protesters had fled the area. Soon the empty shacks and abandoned campsites were in flames. MacArthur claimed that he had specifically prohibited burning the camps and that they had been set ablaze by the retreating rioters. So at this point, there's conflicting information about who set camps on fire. Was it the military? Was it the rioters as they were leaving? There's a lot of questions about who did that. And MacArthur insists it was the rioters as they were leaving. He ordered his forces to demolish the remaining campsites in order to prevent the fire from spreading out of control, and to gather any remaining army tents, cots, and supplies that had been given to the bonus army by the government. The next day, the troops rounded up stragglers and completed the destruction of the camps. So what did this look like? Like, we've only seen the documents leading up into this point, but now we're going to get a glimpse of what this looked like from a newsreel of the time. So people, we didn't really have news stations or televisions, right? So at this time, we're depending on these newsreels to give people the news. And so the first thing you see here is that abandoned building from the Treasury Department that was scheduled for demolition. And we can see that this is the police trying to remove these people from the building, and they're refusing to leave. So they're being dragged out by the police, as you can see here. And now we see the military coming in. You see them on horses. So this is the cavalry that we heard about that was called in, and the camps that are on fire, right? Some pretty bad fires. And so you can see the police arresting, you know, the public knows these are veterans that are getting arrested. These are those tanks that were called in. So I want you guys to be thinking as you're watching these images, how do you think the public received this information? How do you think their opinions were of watching something like that happening? So now we'll get to see some of the pictures that occurred in the newspaper. We've seen this one. This is of the camp before. The camp before. And now we start to see, and we can use some inferences here. There's guys in police hats here dragging somebody out. They're carrying them, right? We can see here some of these protesters have clubs and they're hitting the police officers. Here we can see them getting into a skirmish. This guy's holding what looks like a faucet attached to a pipe maybe. And there's all these bricks that they were talking about that were thrown at the police. And we see a policeman's hat flying off, and there's some people fighting down here. We see people throwing bricks and a police officer holding his head, so he probably got hit. And there's just more of this like skirmish of people throwing bricks at each other. And so this is after that happened, or before this happened, and afterwards you can see someone wrote where a veteran was killed. And they have a little arrow pointing, and they're talking about when the police fired shots. So this picture ran a lot in newspapers, and so this is them dragging people out of that abandoned building. And so I think this picture is really, really interesting if we really look at it. There's a rope here, which we can assume they put up to keep the bonus marchers back. You can see this man, the tall man in the middle, is holding a club, but his head has also got like blood on it. And we can tell this is a police officer because he's got his little police officer hat over here. But these men don't look happy, do they? This kind of looks like a scary situation. So this is a really interesting picture. The superintendent of police here, Glassford, was a veteran too. And when the veterans started to arrive, he organized supplies for them. So him and another wealthy person in town bought the men food and tents, and they sent cigarettes and a bunch of other things that they needed for being in the campsite. And he rode through the campsite every day. His motorcycle was green, and everybody knew who he was because he really sympathized with the veterans because he was a veteran, right? So now we see these pictures of the soldiers. And when we look at a primary source, it's really important that we look at all the clues that come with it, right? So on the bottom, it's here, it says, illustrating leisurely advance of soldiers and lack of resistance on part of the bonus seekers. So that tells us that the person who has put this picture together and written this caption really wants for you to believe that this wasn't a big deal, the soldiers didn't have to act forcefully, the bonus marchers didn't resist. And we know from looking at the other documents and that video and stuff that this simply was not true. And this is a formation of soldiers, they say, but we can tell that the camp is on fire in this picture. And here it's smoldering, and it says, illustrating lack of resistance to soldiers' advance after first evacuation began. So I don't know if there's not resistance. We have a guy over here like holding a pole, and I'm not sure exactly what's going on. I think it would be safe to assume that some of the soldiers had come back to collect their personal items. So this says, illustrating the effectiveness of tear gas, soldiers just arriving in an area covered with smoke. So remember, we heard in the document that they were using tear gas, but only after they announced it. They would say, guys, you have to leave. If you don't leave, we're going to shoot tear gas into the area. So they did. And you can see this guy here is wearing like a World War I helmet and a gas mask, just like these veterans would have done in World War I. So here is some of these soldiers leaving, their faces are covered. And if you guys remember, in World War I, it was really the first time that gas had been used against soldiers, and some of it was horrific. So the government is now gassing World War I veterans who had already been gassed for our country in war. So this was something that the public was seeing. And this is kind of the full aftermath. It had been burned, it had been abandoned. You saw the fire department with the water hoses in the newsreel, so they've sprayed it all down. So now it's there's just puddles where things used to be left. And here's just another image of, this one's one of the different camps, but they're walking through where some of those riots were, and you can see those bricks that were being thrown back and forth. So in the chat box now, how do you guys think the public responded to seeing the images and the newsreels of the bonus marchers and how the government treated them? Angry, they weren't happy, people are saying. Probably outraged. So let's look at some of these covers of newspapers here. So initially, the press was fairly sympathetic with President Hoover, and to some extent, they applauded MacArthur's actions based on the assumption that the rioting was the work of the criminal elements and not honest veterans. Public reaction, however, was largely negative. Most of the nation thought it was shameful to deploy tanks, tear gas, and bayonets against unarmed veterans. In far-off Albany, New York, Democratic presidential candidate Franklin Delano Roosevelt grasped the political implications instantly. He completely knew what this meant for his presidential campaign. He told a friend after hearing the news, well, this elects me. So Franklin Roosevelt thought that the reaction from the public was so bad that this event alone was going to get him elected. So what do you guys think? Do you think that Hoover had to do this, that he had to send in the military to break up the bonus marchers? Or do you think that was a mistake and it could have been handled in a different way? And you can write your answer in the chat box, because that's kind of what the whole thing is when we're historians and students and we're learning, and then we get to look back at the past. We can question these decisions. Was this the correct thing to do, or was this a mistake? Was there maybe another way this could be handled? So it seems like a lot of you say that you think it was a mistake, it could have been handled in a different way. And we don't know. We can just speculate. There's no right or wrong answer to that question. So in the end, the bonus marchers did receive their bonus early. They were paid out in 1936 under Franklin Roosevelt because he was elected. Herbert Hoover only served one term. When the Veterans Administration began planning benefits for World War II veterans, the bonus army was at the front of their decision making. The GI Bill was created in 1944 as part of the legacy, cited these bonus marchers as the reason that they provided so much support. So now we talked about context and like how it would lead us to understand the historic impact of these events. So can you guys think of some of the historic impact that came out of the bonus march and the results of the bonus march? So we can see some of it really obviously, like Franklin Roosevelt was elected. We don't know if that was a direct result of the bonus march or not, but it definitely was impactful. So I would bet that a lot of the bonus marchers left and felt like they didn't accomplish very much, right? But now we know that the Veterans Administration used the bonus army to plan their benefits for veterans. It forced the Veterans Administration to push through a GI Bill to make sure that veterans had good treatment in hospitals and job placement. It provided financial support for the veterans. Everything changed after the bonus march for veterans. Public perception really changed. Remember in the beginning, it said when men were coming home with shell shock, the public was just first starting to question, is the government doing enough for veterans? At the end of this, the public definitely believed the government was not doing enough for veterans, and they had not treated them well when they were using their First Amendment right to petition the government and peacefully assemble. So this is our whole timeline of what we looked at today, 1917 all the way to July of 1932. And I want to thank you guys for coming. I use primary sources to build all of this. They mostly come from the presidential papers at the Herbert Hoover Presidential Library Museum. Some of the photos in the newspapers and headlines came from a variety of online archives. And I sent you guys to the US Capitol website to look at some of their primary sources too. If you guys have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat box and I will stick around for a few more minutes and answer any questions you guys have. Thank you guys for coming, people who are signing off. Thank you. All right, if you guys think about anything, you can email me, elizabeth.dinchel@nara.gov. Thank you for hanging out with us today, and check the site. There's a bunch of new sessions that have been added to the registration. Thank you guys.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.